Hello, everyone. This is Susan. I'm filling in for Jill because she had some surgery last week. And so I am going to be teaching her class today. And we're going to do the little card. And we're going to do a bigger picture. Of course, you can do it whatever size you want of trees in a winter scene. So I know some of you have painted before, some of you are new. What I did here, you probably don't want to do. So if you're going to do a card, and I cut mine, so it's just like a postcard. But if you're going to do a card, and I'm going to switch back so you're not seeing me anymore, and you're going to see what I'm doing here. What you want to do is take your card, your picture, and trace it. Hopefully you picked up some graphite paper from us, or you have some. And I don't know if you know how to use this or not, but it's got a shiny side and it's got a matte side. And what you would want to do is take your picture, put it shiny side down and on your cardstock, and then you're going to trace your picture onto there, which is what I did here. But what I want, before we get started with that, what I want to talk about is if you're going to fold your card in half and make it a card that you send somebody and write inside, you want to take your paper and you want to press it, and I'm just using my paintbrush stick here, so that you have it folded. Now I'll cut off the rest of this later because I didn't fold it exactly in the middle, but I want my card to be this size. So when we go to paint, so that you don't end up with a line like I did here at the top and bottom, when you tape, if you're going to use tape, put your tape right at that edge, and above it. And I don't actually have tape with me, so I'm not taping mine. But now you have this line, so you don't want to go past this line. If you don't have tape, don't worry about it. You don't want to go past this line. So what we're going to do today is we're going to start with this painting. We're going to do the background of it, and we're going to set it aside to dry. And while it's drying, we're going to start on the winter scene. And one of the things I want to talk about with this winter scene of the trees is there are many different ways to do trees. And Jill is actually, I found when I started to do trees and I practiced that I am actually not very good at making my trees kind of random. So I started out, and if you see my tree here, it just looks perfect, right? Well, trees out in public and, out in the woods aren't going to be perfect. And then I made this other kind of fat one that looks like a cedar tree. And so these aren't great. But what I do like about this painting is that it has like a path, as if I was walking through the woods. So I went off and I practiced trees. So this was my very first start. And I want you guys to get a piece of scrap paper. And I want you to practice trees. Once we get the background and that thing is drying, we're going to practice, because you can see the progression. And I really feel like this one looks pretty good. But you see how it's kind of random, and how this one, I just went across. And this one is much more realistic and it's kind of random. But then I said, okay, I watched a bunch of people online and said, okay, well, do they actually, the branches kind of go down instead of up like I did here? And it's up to you. You can do it any way you want. So I ended up doing this little picture. But as you can see, I'm a little unhappy because there's like two sides to this picture, which is okay with me. I can cut it in half and make this side a card. But I could actually add another little tree in here somewhere to make more of a path. that my trees are going through. So I really did like the way she has this, where it's kind of like you're going through a path in the woods. So is everybody with me? Does anybody have any questions right now? Do you want to take a minute or so to trace your bird, or are you ready to start painting? So I'm gonna have to, Ashley, I don't know if you're still here. But let me look and see if there's anything in chat. Okay.
There's nothing in chat.
Not seeing anything. So I'm assuming you guys, if you don't want to talk, post something in the chat and I'll try to take a look there.
Susan, can you hear me? It's Mary.
Yes, Mary.
Hey,
I can hear you.
I'm just wondering, because maybe I didn't read something on the website. I'm just wondering for future, like I didn't know that these, like we were going to cut or fold our paper in half, and it was going to be a, you know, something we could use it as a card. So I just put my images in the middle of the larger piece of paper. So was there something on our class page that would have, you know, let us know that these were going to be folded in half and used as cards? Did I miss it, or was it on there?
That is a good question, Mary. I did not actually send out the email. And
Okay.
so
Well,
I'm not totally aware of what was sent. I was just asked to do the class.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
I saw it on there after.
Okay.
After I did my picture. I did my picture on regular paper too.
Okay. It doesn't, to me, it doesn't really matter. If you want a large picture of this, then do a large picture or do it in the middle. If you want to later, if you've sketched it in the middle of your paper of a large sheet and you want to later make a card out of it, you might want to tape around it so it's smaller. And then you could cut it out.
Okay.
Or you can just make it a picture and let the background kind of flow in what they call like a vignette if you don't want to tape, and you'll just bleed it out to where it's not showing any edges. So that just depends on how you want to do it, Mary. Did that help?
Thanks.
Okay. So with this smaller one, and is everybody ready? If you're just watching, that's fine. What I saw somebody talk about, now I have a fairly large palette of colors because I just like a lot of color. But if you're not familiar with watercolor, what you want to do is you take like a spray bottle and you do what they're calling, you spray them, and they're calling it activate. I thought that was a really good word. Today we're using just a green and a blue for the tree. And in the background of the little picture, you can pretty much choose whatever color you want. But I will tell you, on my background, I chose like blues and purples for the top, and I did a green and blue on the bottom. But what you have to be very careful with, the reason after I had picked my colors, the reason that I ended up picking the blue and the green on the bottom was because I realized green will mix with purple and make an ugly brown, right? So you could want to keep colors that are going to mix and not look terrible. So I know that purple and blue are next to each other on the color wheel, and green and blue are also next to each other. But if this green hits that purple, it's really going to be awful. So I made sure when I was just putting colors in that I dropped my green with my blue in the middle of them, and then my purple, so that the green and the purple didn't get together. Does that make sense to everyone?
Yep.
So what we're going to start out with is we're going to wet all around the outside of the bird. So we're not going to go into the bird. We're just going to wet around it. And I kind of wish my light would come on this thing. There you go. Okay. And we're going to wet around that. And this technique is called wet into wet. And you've probably done it several times with Debbie and Jill if you've done this before. So you go all around the bird and any items on here and just put clean water. And when you're doing this, if possible, use the largest brush you have, because then you can get it done so that you don't have.
Can someone go on mute? There's a lot of banging around going on. I don't think it's Susan.
No, it's not me.
Okay, thanks.
I don't think it's me.
I'll need people. Okay. No, I don't know what happened there. Now we have you as our person. Remove spotlight. Let's see. Huh. I don't know if Ashley's still in the meeting or not.
I'm still here.
Ashley, do you know how to make my screen the pin again?
Let me try.
I think we have to spotlight me or something.
You should be spotlighted.
But somehow it went to Patty. So
You're spotlighted on mine.
oh, I somehow got Patty then.
You're
Okay, as long as you guys can see me. Okay, all right. So, all right, so I'm gonna go ahead and go around. And then I'm going to make some puddles of some of these colors. Now, I just kind of went into my little thing here. So what I'm going to do is try to dry my ribbon so that it's not wet. So I've got everything wet around this bird. And I'm going to make a puddle by putting by picking a paint. So I'm going to pick some purple here and put it down and add some more water and put some purple in there. Then I'm going to pick a blue, which I'm kind of just randomly picking colors here. So I'm mostly going to go with blue and purple. And if you look at Jill's picture, her big one here, she mostly went with blues and purples. She threw some darker gray in there, but it's mostly blues and purples. So I'm going to get a few different blues here, and then I'm just going to drop them into this picture. So I'm going to let that kind of flow, and I'm going up to my line there. And I'm going to drop some purple in. And because they're wet like this and my paper's wet, I can kind of make it flow where I want it to go. So I'm going to put some more blue in and just kind of let it run places. And it's very wet. You can see that. So it's going wherever I let the water go. So. Now, what you want to do is, you see how I have large puddles of stuff? I'm really going to dry off my brush, and then I'm going to go to these puddles and kind of suck up this extra water. So that, and you can also let it run to an edge, like here's an edge, And I'm just going to suck that up and dry it off a little so that it doesn't, because if it dries and it's too much water like that, it'll sometimes cause those blooms that we worry about. I don't worry about them so much. I actually like blooms, but some people really don't like them. We're going to make a lot of blooms in this anyway later on. One of the things I was telling Suzanne about earlier, when it comes to watercolor, one of the important things is if you have really wet paper like we have right now, you don't want to put right now, as it's starting to dry, more wet into it. You want it to be, and I was describing it to her as a lot of times you get these mistakes made or blooms because you're putting too much paint that is too wet into paint that has already started to dry. So my analogy was tea, coffee, tea, milk, and cream. So tea is when it's really kind of runny, watery. Milk is when you're getting a little bit thicker. And then cream is when you're really almost using pigment with just very little water. So you can take your cream and your milk and put it in your tea, but you don't want to put your tea in your cream or your milk because it's going to be too much. But as you can see, it's still pretty wet. I'm going to take this and put it aside right now. And we're going to get started on the background of the other one. But we don't want to put this too far because as soon as the shine goes off of it, we're going to splat some water on it to try to get some of those blooms in the background. Okay, so on our big tree picture, what we're going to do, and this is a little different from the way Jill was telling me she did it. I am going to do the background first because our background is very kind of bland. There isn't a lot going on in the background. So I'm going to wet the whole picture again, and I'm using a really large brush now. But if you don't have one, get the whole page wet as much as you can with your brush with just clear water. And maybe she didn't start this because then this would have to dry a little. And take some real watery blue. Now, if you want to make a gray, like today is a very gray day out here. So one of the things about making gray is in order to make a gray, if you don't already have one, you're going to mix complementary colors. So I have a blue here on my palette. And if I want to gray that down, I'm going to take some of this orange and mix it in with that blue, and you see I get a gray. So that is how you get your grays and other colors. So I'm just going to kind of make a gray sky across here in the background of this. And because it's a snowy day, and I'm just going to kind of let that run down a little. I'll make shadows on my snow later. So now I have this gray snowy day, and I'm sure that's why she didn't do this right away, because now I have to let this dry too. And I don't have a blow dryer with me. If you have a blow dryer, you can dry your sheet, but I'm just kind of letting it run. So does everybody see that? And are you? So I'm going to set that aside now and get my little guy back, who is drying nicely. So what I'm going to do with this little guy, and I saw a lady do this on the internet. I was looking up for how to do these backgrounds, and she did this to make like a snowy scene on her other one, which I really don't want to do. But it's getting dry, and I can tell because I'm losing what they call the sheen on it. Although in some cases it is still pretty wet. But what I'm gonna do right now is I'm wetting my brush and all it has is clear water on it. And I'm just gonna kind of fling it at this.
Hey, Susan. Someone missed how to get the gray. How to
Oh.
mix the gray.
Okay, hold on. I'm still flinging water and I'm having fun doing it. So, okay. So as you can see, I'm getting little blooms in my background. Let me see if I can get it closer so you can see that. Because I flung water on it when it wasn't quite dry. Okay, so in order to get gray, take your, in this instance, I'm taking blue. And it's opposite color. You need, color wheels are fairly handy. If you have one, you can look at it. But so if you're looking at a color wheel, you start with your basic colors, yellow, blue, and red. And then you mix, you know, those are like a triangle. And when you mix yellow with red, you get orange. And that orange then is across from your blue on this color wheel. So that color that's across from the blue, which is orange, if I mix it with the blue, it grays it down. And oops, and you can make, I think I mixed my pink in with that too. So you can take your blue, mix some orange in, and you're gonna get a gray. Now, one of the things that I also told Jill, because when she did her trees, she darkened her, you can take a color, like let's say I have a green that I want to do my tree with. So I've got this green and it's not very dark, right? So you can take a black or a Payne's gray if you have one and darken it. But what I told Jill was I don't have black in my palette. And I don't have Payne's gray in my palette. So if I want to darken that with a black, I'm going to take a green and its opposite color is purple. And I'm going to mix those two together till I get a black and see how they start turning black. Well, now I can add more green to that and it turns into a dark green. So you see how it's so much darker than that green there. And so this is the color that I want to use for my trees. This dark, dark green.
Susan, Susan,
Yes, ma'am.
what is this blooming business? What's that? What's this blooming that you're talking about?
Well, did you splat water on your picture yet?
I did.
Did you see little little spots come up that look kind of like psychedelic?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
That's
a little bit.
called blooming.
I see. Okay.
And in a lot of fancy artists don't like blooms in their pictures. But because we're doing this background, we like a bloom. I mean, that's what we want back there. It looks a little more like it's snowing or something, right? It gives us a variegated background.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay. So we're making blooms on purpose. I spilt some paint here somehow and it's just making me miserable. Okay. So did everybody kind of get what I'm green dark?
I've got green.
Okay. I don't know who that is, but we need to mute him, huh?
That's right.
Maybe it's Kathy. Nope. Okay. All right. So back to this. Okay. So what I suggest while these two are drying, and especially because you've done your background now, I suggest you get a piece of scrap paper and mix up some paint, some green paint. Try to make it dark by mixing either mixing black in or making a black, which is what I'm going to try to do right now. So I mixed my green and purple. I made it black. Now I'm adding more green to make it a dark green. And I want you to get your scrap paper before we go to our big paper and try to make trees. So I'm using a flat brush. And I'm gonna try to do like a trunk sort of, so that I feel like I have a trunk. And what I found when I was practicing these is to go to one side and you kind of just, I just kind of pat along. I don't know if you can see that I'm doing that. So what I'm doing here too is making sure that maybe not all of my little branches connect to each other. And they don't even have to connect to the tree thing. So I'm going out, I'm practicing doing this, and I'm getting smaller as I get to the top, because I was starting at the top, and I can tell you I was starting at the top and I was just got too fat right away. But I have this branch now on this side. Now, when I go to do the other side, I don't exactly want my branches to match up perfectly with the other side. You know, they shouldn't all start at the same point. They might, you know, so I'm kind of making, it's a little hard to do, and I'm going fast. You don't have to go as fast as I do, but I kind of have a tree now. It's not perfect. And I am going to mix some blue into this so that I have some other color in there. And the blue's going to mix with the green and give our tree a little zing, so it's not just a green tree. Now, you can also do this, as Jill did, using a round brush. So this one's called a round brush, even though it doesn't look very round. And you can try not to use too wet of paint. Make your stem. And one of the interesting things I saw on the internet was, because I have blue and green in here, they took some orange, very dry, almost directly out of your palette, very little water, and dropped it in for the stem. And because it's an opposite color from those other colors, it makes a brown. So you've got a brown stem kind of going through there, brownish gray in this case, because I think my blues were more in the middle. But that's how I make a tree. Now, you can start here and just kind of, but you want to make sure you're jiggy-jagging it. You know, your tree isn't perfect. You don't want it to be perfect. And you skip along. So practice trees a little bit before we go to our big picture and try to put them on there. See, I already got too fat on this one. Starting from the top doesn't work for me. And change your color out to your blue every so often. I like doing one side first, because then that way I make sure I don't. I don't get my lines too perfect. But I still do. I somehow I'm just not random enough. All right, well, anyway. So play with trees a little. Try to get good at it better. Be random. Don't be perfect with them. And you want to mix up a good amount. Like I was running out of green there. So you want to mix up a good amount of color, because if we're going to that big picture and we're painting a couple of those big ones, or at least one at a time, and they're bigger, we want a lot of color on our palette. So I'm going to mix up some blue and some green. Make sure I have some pretty big puddles here and not too wet. It's kind of what I would call a milk consistency, almost to a cream. If you can get to a cream, that would be good. So now I'm throwing my purple in here, making my black for that green, and then adding more green. Dark, dark green. I'm going to make a little black puddle to mix with my blue of the green and the blue, or green and purple. Okay, so I've got a dark green puddle, dark blue puddle. How's everybody doing? Okay. Okay. Okay, I've got my giant puddles. I've practiced trees. I am going to try to get started making. And this is all right if this big picture is still a little bit damp, which mine is. If my color's thick enough, well, it should actually be drier. I'm going to try to dry it a little where I'm going to put my tree. So there are a couple ways for you to measure out where your trees should be. You can start with, deciding, okay, this one definitely bigger. I've got a few inches at the top. It's kind of even in the middle of the page. And so when I look at my page here, you can either draw it with a pencil and say, okay, I wouldn't do a drawing of it, but it's so far from the edge. There's an inch or two, and it's got a couple inches at the top, a couple inches at the bottom. So I'm going to kind of put a line here for this tree. And it's not exact, but that's kind of where I want that tree to be. Now my other tree is, if you notice, a little bit further back. It's not parallel with this one. So it's maybe, an inch above where that is. But the top looks like it's almost equal, maybe a little bit lower. So I'm going to start my line here on this one a little bit higher and go up about to where that other tree was. But this one's not going to be quite as wide. So I want to make sure that I don't make it too wide. I'm going to put some lines on either side of the base to say, okay, that's about as big as I want that one to be. This one's going to be a little bit wider. So that's about where I want that base to be. And then if it's dry enough, it should feel cool to the touch if it's dry enough. I'm going to start with my green and just go on and, ooh, a little wet. So I'm just drying this off on my pad. And I want that to be a lot darker, a lot thinner. And I'm just going to start doing my branch out to about right there. And then just kind of random. Throw some blue in there. Back to the green. Everybody doing all right? Let's see, it's too perfect again. I gotta mess it up over here a little. And now I'm gonna drop some brown, some orange right in the middle there. In a couple spots that I hope will turn brown. And if not, I'm gonna make it turn brown by adding a little green. This is the magic of watercolor when it starts working on its own. Okay. So now I got that guy. I'm going to start working on my second guy, who I also want to be dark, but maybe a little bit smaller. Now, if you want, on Jill's picture, we had this one a little fuller, right? And this one's got the branches showing through a little bit more. If you were wanting to do that, you could actually like put a little more water in there and kind of mush around with your paint, drop some water in to make those connect so that it's not quite, it's a little fuller than that other one. Again, mine are just too perfect and I hate it. They're not random. Okay. So now I've got to let these two kind of dry. How's everybody doing with theirs? A little paint splatter on here. I'm just trying to rub it off. Okay. Okay, so I'm gonna let this guy dry a little and go back to this little guy. And I'm gonna use a smaller brush because this is a very much smaller painting. And what we did on this card was we made a little gray and went in on the shoulders of the bird and where this line is and put some gray in, and then along where the wings go down like this. And use that same gray on the ribbon where it kind of goes down and around. So in this case, we're going to make a very weak kind of tea gray. We don't want it to be thick. We want it to be very watery so that it comes out really light. And my gray right now is kind of bluish. And I think I would like it to be a little more. Let me see. It's really, really, I need it a lot more watery than that. Okay, so I've got some pretty watery gray now. And remember, when watercolor is always going to dry lighter, right? It's not going to dry as dark as it looks when you first put it on. So put your gray on. You don't have to be and I'm just going to put it real gently along there towards the back. Now, if it's going places I don't want it to go, I'm drying off my brush a little and picking some up. I didn't want it to go all the way down that because part of that is supposed to be lighter. Okay, is everybody doing all right?
Yep.
Does anybody have any questions? Are your trees coming out hopefully less perfect than mine tend to?
Yeah, mine are much looser than yours.
Good,
That's the way I like to paint, so.
good. Now, one other thing that we're gonna practice before we do it, I have to see if I have mine. I thought we need to practice blowing paint around, because you're going to use our gesso at some point. And you're gonna blow on the wings. So mine didn't come out great here. But if you look at Jill's, and this is Cornelia, I was saying later you could do this. She has all this blown out. And that was with the gesso. But before we play with the gesso, what you can do is get another scrap piece of paper, or maybe the one you've already been working on, and put some paint on it. I have this one. So trying to get the paint just right for blowing, you need it kind of wet, but not too wet, but not too dry. So I'm making this little spot of paint. And you see how I blew it? So that was kind of just right. It was not too wet, not too dry. It almost looks too perfect though. So let me see if I can blow some. See, you want to get it kind of random. So I'm going to have to practice this a few times. Because when we wet our gesso, we only have so much of it. So practice blowing, making little puddles, and blowing your paint around with the straw. All right, getting a little better at it. Okay.
Susan,
Yes, ma'am.
I have a big straw like you use for sucking up smoothies or something. Should I look for a smaller straw? Like
Practice with that one and see what it does.
yeah.
I don't think a smoothies, I mean, this one's fairly large. You know, just see how much air you're getting out of it. It may actually work pretty good. But what I was finding was if I blow it just one angle, it's going to go straight. If I want to get it to go off to the side, I need to come to the side and blow out that way. So it depends on how you want it to look. What'd you find, Mary? Did you try it?
Yeah.
Is it not?
It's kind of I have to breathe in and blow out a lot because the straw is so big.
Yeah. I've actually been in a class where the teacher just did it.
Oh.
But you'd have to blow really, I can't blow hard enough. I have to have the straw.
Yeah. Okay.
But he
I think I'll keep on with this big straw. So
yeah. But that's going to be where we want to go with the gesso. And I don't know if I'm brave enough to do it now, but I'm going to try just to show you guys. So the gesso itself is pretty thick. And I had paint on my paintbrush. So you can either put it on something. I'm just going to go ahead and add some water into it to try to thin it out. And maybe I'll test the gesso first and see if it's thin enough on my practice piece of paper, because when I did it that last time, it really was not, it didn't go the way I wanted it to. So I'm going to try it here and see if I can blow it. See, it's not working for me. Let's see. So you want it pretty wet. But see, what I found the first time was it was wet, but it didn't really, it didn't stay white. And that kind of bothered me. It was too wet. So I might have it thin enough now. But I need the white to stay in there too. I don't want it so wet. So what I did was I put it along the edge of the wing right here. And now I'm going to try to blow it and see if it blows out or not. See, it's not blowing very well. I think it may need a little more water. Oh, there you go. A little more water. Now I'm just kind of dabbing water on it. Oh, I like that. So I got my wing going out a little bit there. So on this one, I kind of put it on. It was kind of watery. And then I just dabbed it with a little more water. It's definitely a trial and error technique. And my bird didn't quite go off the page, but I'm going to blow on there anyway. All right, so I've got some wing blowing there. But see, here's my concern. It's getting light again. I'm going to drop some more of the gesso in, see if that'll keep it darker. But practice with that gesso and the blowing. So now I got flowy wings on this guy. And I will tell you that Jill said that she used some glitter glue. I don't know if you can see the glittering on here. And these stamps, she had little stamps and used the gesso and then stamped onto the paper. I don't have stamps with me here to do that. But that is also one way to do that. Now for the rest of the bird, I'm going to go ahead and take a really small brush to do the eye and the beak. And I'm going to make a black like I talked about before with a purple, really thick. We don't want much water on this at all. And the green. And I'm going to make me a black. And then I'm just going to go into the eye. And the way she had her eye done, it's leaving the pupil white and then putting the little dot things on top. So I'm just kind of filling in here and on the top of it. Putting these little dot things on the top of that. And I'm also, while I have the black, going to do my string. And when you do this, make sure that the top part of the beak is above the string. I mean, the string goes under the top part, so you don't go over that top part of the beak. And then it comes down over the top of the bottom, over the bottom beak, hopefully. And I just wrote in my letters for this. But you can do that later. You can do it in cursive, however you want to do your lettering on that. If you take Debbie's calligraphy class, you can do it that way. And then I'm going to go in with some orange, orangish and some yellow. I don't want to really don't want it to be too bright orange. But we're going to do the beak. And that is basically the end of my bird. I'm going to let that dry off to the side. And go back to my Christmas trees. Well, sort of Christmas trees. So for these background trees, when we talked about the dark, the cream, the coffee, so what's important to in a painting is to have different values. So this is your strong value. Anything that with a really strong value is going to come to the front of the picture. You want to make sure, like if you squint your eyes at something, you want to have different values in your pictures. You don't want it to all be the same tone. A good way to tell if your picture has the correct values, the dark, medium, and light, is to take a picture of it and get it on your computer and then look at it in black and white. And you'll be able to see the difference really drastically. So as you can see, this one is slightly darker. I would say a medium value. And then these other ones they're a little bit less, where you have the lighter values. So I'm going to kind of eyeball where this little tree is. And he looks like he's a little bit shorter than that. Well, a lot shorter than that one. And, coming out further up. So I'm going to go with a little more watery color. And I'm not going to do the amount of detail I did on these front ones. They're less important. We don't need as much detail. And, you know, they may actually look a little more perfect because the farther out it goes, they look more. And again, remember that your color will dry lighter. So you got to kind of remember that. And again, I'm mixing the blue and the green. And I'm kind of running into this tree. That's okay. Yeah, I'm going to leave him right about there. Make him a little messier. And I've got this other one, going to add a little, even more water. And just kind of put him further back up here. So now my person can walk here and through there. Oh, I may need a little more color. That's going to dry really dark, really light. And my other little guy back here. This guy, and see, I'm starting to see that they're a little lighter, but this guy may need a little more color because he's almost as light as those things. So I need him to be more of the medium value. Okay. Now I'm going to go in with the shadows here, and I'm going to make a really kind of grayish blue. It's a winter day. These trees have some shadow underneath them. There's not really sunlight, but it kind of is coming out. So I've got my tree shape, but it's very watery so that it's not going to be really too dark of a shadow. And if my color bleeds in there a little, I don't really care. That's fine. Shadows really, I think, make your picture seem a little more realistic really quickly. And if your shadow looks like it's getting too dark, just blot it with your paper towel. And blot that guy a little too. Started to get a little too light. And that is basically our wintry scene Christmas tree field. Let's see. Looks fairly close. Now, these three are actually very similar. I shouldn't have blotted that guy, huh? So I'm going to add a little more color back into him. And what I would do, what I need to do now is put the brush down and wait and see, if it dries way too light, which it may do. I may need to darken the trees a little bit, but I just want to make sure I'm keeping the variation, that they're not all the same color. Blow on that tree a little. Are there any questions? And you guys are welcome to unmute if you want to.